Thank you all for coming. So we will now begin, thankfully. Apologies for the delay. So hoş geldiniz everyone to the second Young Turkish Cypriot event here at SOAS University. I would first like to welcome some of our special guests. His Excellency, the Turkish Ambassador Koray Ertaş, Her Excellency, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus Ambassador Çimen Keskin. We also have author Arif Tahir Erisen, whose book on the Cyprus problem I'll talk to you a bit more about later. We also have in attendance some former special advisors to the British government, international political consultants, a number of councillors, and dozens of Turkish and Turkish Cypriot NGOs, student associations, and advocacy groups. I want to also say a quick thank you to the SOAS Turkish Society, led by Charlie Tuskaram, Eren Şahin, and the Presidency for the Turks Abroad and Related Communities, YTB, for helping me organise this event. I'll now quickly pass over to Charlie, who will make some comments about fire exits and things like that. So thank you.
Öncelikle herkese iyi akşamlar. Geldiğiniz için hepinize çok teşekkür ediyorum. Before we jump in, I'd just like to make some comments on the fire safety protocol as required by the university. In the rare case that there is a fire emergency, we'll be taking any of these fire exits on the right, left, or these ones here. Sorry.
No worries.
I'm sorry, it's been a long day. Again, thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Charlie's done himself a bit of disservice there. He has helped me out tremendously, and he does a lot for the Turkish society here at SOAS University. So thank you, Charlie. So, a bit about me before we begin for some of our new faces. My name is Eren Ramadan, and I started the YTC back in October 2020 as a way to educate and teach fellow young Turkish Cypriots about our history, culture, and ongoing issues in Cyprus. As someone passionate about history, I was compelled to research my own heritage in more detail to truly understand where I came from and why my people continue to remain internationally isolated. 4 years later, the YTC pages have amassed a total following of 26,000 people, with a consistent monthly reach of up to 1 million online users. However, I knew that I didn't want to just progress the organisation online, and I have begun planning a series of in-person events to engage more of the Turkish Cypriot youth and community. Back in June, I hosted our first event titled Cyprus 2054, A Path to a Two-State Solution, in which our ambassadors sat as panellists, as well as the International Relations Advisor to the TRNC Presidency, Professor Hüseyin Işıksal. I therefore really appreciate you all being here tonight and joining me on this journey to inform the world on who the Turkish Cypriot people are. And more specifically, to help me do that tonight, we have a great panel. Firstly, Mustafa Kureyşi, Chairman of Cezire Derneği. Mustafa Kureyşi is a highly respected researcher with a focus on Islamic and Turkish history in Cyprus. In 2008, he founded Cezire Derneği, a historical association dedicated to preserving and promoting the island's rich history. His work includes extensive research across the National Archives of North Cyprus, Turkey, and the Kew Archives in the UK. Mustafa has also served as a historical advisor to the Council of Turkish Cypriot Associations and is well known for his seminars, articles, and in-depth field studies on both sides of the island. His contributions have made him a leading voice in the study of Cyprus's Islamic history and heritage. Second, we have Ersu Ekrem, former chair of the British Turkish Cypriot Association. He was born in Cyprus in 1953 and hence witnessed and lived through the 1963 Greek Cypriot atrocities firsthand. He travelled to the UK in 1970 and was one of the founding members of IKTOF, the Federation of Turkish Cypriot Students in the UK, serving in it for many years. He has been involved in many other associations, including the SOAS Turkish Cypriot Association, Embargoed, Human Rights for Turkish Cypriots, and ultimately the British Turkish Cypriot Association. So today we aim to cover the journey of the Turkish Cypriot people from pre-Ottoman times through the Ottoman era and the post-Ottoman period. This section of the presentation will be carried out by Mustafa. We will then have a short break and then move on to focus on the Turkish Cypriot struggle during the 1950s, 60s and ultimately 1974. And this section will be carried out by Ersu. Now there will be a lot of information thrown at you tonight, so please feel free to take pictures and videos of the slides for your reference. Tonight's event is also being filmed, so you can watch and share afterwards. But ultimately I want you to come away from tonight knowing where Turkish Cypriots came from, what they endured and how they are moving forward. After the presentations are done, with a short break in between, we will move on to a Q&A session, followed by a food and drinks reception. So with that, I hope you all enjoy your evening, and we'll begin with Mustafa. Thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to welcome Your Excellencies, Ambassador of the Republic of Turkey, Koray Ertaş, Ambassador of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, Çimen Keskin Hanım, our distinguished guests, and to all of you who have come, I'm honoured to be here in your presence today. My slide today, my presentation rather, is about the Turks of Cyprus, who are called by many different names throughout history. Some may prefer the title Cypriot for these people. Commonly, we use the term Turkish Cypriot, Cypriot Turks, Muslims of Cyprus. But what we don't want to do when we're looking at history is what's called the fallacy of presentism. We may see ourselves and our community in one way, but how is it that our people, or the Cypriot Muslims, Turks, saw themselves throughout history?
Sorry guys, it's probably my fault. Yeah.
So I've mentioned different dimensions, different aspects to the Turkish identity of the native Turks of Cyprus. I mentioned Muslim, which adds a religious dimension. I mentioned Turk, an ethnic dimension, a linguistic dimension. So therefore, in order to link the history of these peoples, we need to go back to the very root of who these people are. What I call the spiritual ancestors, and also those who have an ethnic link to those people as well. And hence we can go back all the way to 648 of the Common Era, to which we have what's called the condominium period. And I would like to consider these people the spiritual ancestors of the Turks in Cyprus. It all started from a prediction by the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, where in both the authentic hadiths of Bukhari and Muslim, it is recorded, and it is recorded as being sound or sahih, even by the likes of Sheikh Al-Albani, in that his milk auntie Haram binti Milhan, who is lovingly known by our people as Hala Sultan, was visited by our dear Prophet. And on those occasions, he actually fell asleep, took a siesta, as one would in those areas. And on the first occasion, he woke up smiling. And he predicted that Haram, who was an elderly lady, would voyage by sea to Cyprus. This would happen a second time. And on this occasion, Haram, Hala Sultan, asked, "Oh, dear Prophet, what is it that makes you smile?" And he repeats the same prediction again. She goes, "Pray that I will be amongst those who would voyage on this naval expedition." You remember the Arabs were in the desert, in the Arabian Peninsula. They were not seafaring people. So this prediction was actually very incredible, considering from the peninsula an old lady to go on a naval expedition. So she requested for the Prophet to pray for him, and he says, "You will be amongst the first to voyage." So there's more accuracy there. And in 648, only within less than 20 years of the Prophet's death, 28th year of the Hijrah, after the migration of the Muslim people from Mecca to Medina, Cyprus was in the hands of the Muslims. This early on, before Anatolia, before Spain, before Morocco, before Pakistan, Cyprus was in the hands of the Muslims, and hence our spiritual link goes back all the way to those ages. We have various periods through that age. As you can see, a 300-year presence of Muslim peoples on the island, from what they call the pious caliphs, the Rashidun, the Umayyads, the Abbasids. And keep in mind, the Abbasid soldiers, this is a period in which the Turks from Central Asia started to become Muslim and were recruited into the armies of the Abbasids. So it's quite possible, or rather reasonable, to assume that there may have been ethnic Turks who were present on the island from that time as well. Now, we all are aware of the kind of the binary of how the world is divided in Islam. Darul Harb, the abode of war, and Darul Islam, the abode of Islam. But in Cyprus's case, because it was what is called a condominium, it was shared between two warring powerhouses. The Romans, that being the Eastern Romans, the Byzantines, and the Islamic Empire. They had to share it. And that sharing agreement is called a condominium. But this presented a problem for the politicians, for the Muslim armies. How are we meant to divide when we have this binary of the adobe of war and the adobe of peace? Where does Cyprus come into this? So great scholars came together and they decided for a third rank, Darul Ahd, the adobe of truce. And the people were known, the Cypriots, both the Cypriot Muslims and the Cypriot Christians, were under the pact of Darul Ahd, Ahlul Ahd, the people of truce. Okay, so this is significant in Islamic history, that Cyprus has been pivotal in having an influence over political decisions, which is why I thought it's worth mentioning. There's also the companions of the Prophet who voyaged and stepped foot in Cyprus. I couldn't list all of them because there's so many of these distinguished people. But we have Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, Abu Talha al-Ansari, Haram, who I mentioned, her husband, Ubadah bin as-Samit, Abu Dhar Ghifari, Abu Darda al-Ansari, who is present in Istanbul. These people honoured Cyprus with their presence. Abu Mansur al-Azhari, a scholar, 10th century scholar, actually mentioned in one of his books, وَفِي ثُغُورَ الشَّامِ مَوْضِئٌ يُقَالُ لَهُ كُبْرُسٌ. He says that Cyprus is within the realm of Sham, the Levant, Syria. It's interesting that this is how they perceived it. Whether true or not, whether you want to believe it or not, that was a perception that the owners of Cyprus at the time had, that the island was within their realm of control. Interestingly, I see that there's many Cypriots here as well. Anyone from Famagusta here at all? Yeah? Okay. So in Turkish we know it as Mausa, right? Doesn't sound like the Greek Amochostos, or the Italian or the English Famagusta. Mausa comes from the word Marusa of Arabic. And Marusa means a place where you dive. It comes from the root word Ros. So if there's anybody amongst us, or you hear anybody saying Magosa, I'm afraid that they are in error. No such thing as Magosa. Mausa derives from Marusa. On the bottom there we have the self-declared Republic of Cyprus, who decided, you know how keen they are for unification, on peace, that they would celebrate that in 965, and you see an image of Emperor Phocas of the Roman Empire, who took complete control of Cyprus. And what happened to those Muslim Cypriots who were there for 300 years? No sign of them. So even that part of the history where we have a history of union between Muslims and Christians is celebrated when they are expelled. Something to think about. Now we move on later on to the Turks. So after the condominium ended, there's a long story, but essentially the Latins or Catholic people start to take over Cyprus. And during that time, there are slaves that are taken. Slaves predominantly from Anatolia, from Turkmens. And Turkmen is a word for the ancestors of the Turks of Cyprus. So the ancestors of the Anatolian Turks, so the ancestors of the Balkan Turks, Turkmen essentially are Oghuz Turks, the Turks of the Western realm. They were taken in great multitudes, such that Maximus Planudes, who dies in 1305, he rejoiced over a victory over these Turkmen. And he said, as can be seen on the bottom there, from the original sources, he says, Os idetien megisten gibru pasan aftom, bithineke megedi thelin oneste. As already the greatest part of Cyprus has been filled with them, meaning the Turkmens. And they no longer wish to benefit from it. They were benefiting from this slavery, but such was the sheer number of these Turkish Turkmen slaves in Cyprus that it presented a threat. The people were getting anxious with these numbers of Turks on the island. Despite this, their influx continued. And decades later, we have primary sources from Nikephoros Gregoras, who died in 1360, a contemporary historian, that between 1330 and 1340, there was frequent arrival of Turkish prisoners of war into Cyprus. What happened to these people? Sometimes the ones who had or were able to remain as Muslims were purchased back, but many of them were baptized, meaning that they became Christian. So what happened to that bloodline? What happened to those Turks? They are the ancestors, or part of the ancestry of our neighbours, the Cypriot Greeks. They also share in this, and I think this is something we should celebrate, that we have something in common here. There was a time in 1326, we can see the image there, with the soldiers on the horses, of the Battle of Hirokitia in 1326, which is a battle in which the Mamluks of Egypt, Mamluk means slave in Arabic, but this was a Turkish dynasty of predominantly Kipchak heritage. Their Sultan Barsbay sent his commander Tagribirdi. Tagribirdi in Anatolian Turkish is Tanrı verdi, who was the commander and led an expedition to Cyprus, in which, and mind you, they didn't call themselves Mamluk. Mamluk it's an Arabic word meaning slave, because they were taken as slaves but eventually took control of the state. The official name was Ad-Dawlati Turkiya, the Turkish state. And the kings, the sultans of the Mamluks were known as Muluka Turk, the Turkish kings. So although they weren't Oghuz stock, they were Kipchak Turks taken from the Caucasus and modern-day Crimea and Ukraine. Such were their numbers and influence in this Mamluk state. They took control of Cyprus. They were controlling who would be leading it. They took tributary from them. But in the war of 1426, the Mamluks saw that there were Turkish Muslims supporting the Christians. They were mercenaries. There were Turkmen Anatolian mercenaries supporting the Christian Latin Cypriots in their battle against the Mamluks. They were led by a person called Garamanoğlu Ali Bey, who was a Turkmen of southern Anatolian extract. So whilst they were merciful to the Christians, they put the Turkmens to the sword. They were treacherous to their ethnic and religious brethren. So hence that is the punishment for such treachery. We forward on to the Ottoman era from 1570 to 1878, during the time of Sultan Selim II, who is the son of Kanuni Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent. The reasoning for this was there was periodical attacks by pirates who were using Cyprus as a base to attack Muslim pilgrims, to attack Muslim traders. These were Turks and Arabs who were being attacked, and Cyprus was used as a base. Furthermore to that, before the Ottomans could actually attack, they needed a fetva, a license. Like the Sultan isn't a king or dictator. He needs a religious verdict, a license, before he can proceed with any plans that he has. And so he asked Ebu Suud Effendi, who was a Sheikh al-Islam at the time, a great Hanafi scholar, and he said, you can proceed. Beyond the fact that they were being attacked by pirates using Cyprus as a base, he also mentioned something interesting, that Cyprus used to have Cemavi, Mesajid, ve Medaris, that there were jamis, grand mosques, and there were mosques, and there were schools, madrasas in Cyprus, which were all wiped out. He's referring back to the spiritual ancestors, which I mentioned earlier. And henceforth, it was their right to take something which already belonged to the Muslims at one point. The settlement policy. Initially, Greek Cypriots, or Greek Orthodox should we say, which is a more accurate term. Greek Cypriot is a modern term. In fact, the Greeks did not even call themselves as such, but we'll get onto that as the slides progress. Initially, Greek Orthodox people who were subservient to the Latins, they were serfs, slaves in effect, having to work a day or two a week for their Latin overlords. Orthodoxy was oppressed, so many had fled the island. The Ottomans first said, the Greek Orthodox should come back. You are welcome back to the island, your island, our island. Secondly, the island was emptied and the production needed to increase, and so Ottoman soldiers were allowed to remain. Those who wished to do so could live on the island, and those who were bachelors had Anatolian wives sent to marry them as well. Those were the first settlers. Those were the precursors, the genesis of the Turkish people, the Muslim people of Cyprus. Soon after, skilled artisans and their families from mostly south central Anatolian regions were sent to settle in Cyprus as well. It was an island of exile, but when we say island of exile, there's a saying that's mentioned as if Cyprus is like Australia and the British policy of sending criminals there. Yes, there were some criminals, but there were also Turkmen, Yurtdışı, politicians, intellectuals, religious classes who were sent. Intellectual people, people of high class, high esteem, were sent to Cyprus. So we shouldn't just focus on a criminal element, right? There were slaves, which were continual. And when we think of slavery, don't think of transatlantic slavery. It's not racial. In fact, in one time in Cyprus's Ottoman history, 50% of the slaves were black, and the other 50% were from the Caucasus, white, much whiter than me. And the slavery was such that he or she would be part of the household. They would work in the fields and in the house, but they also would be married off by their masters. They would be treated as humans. They are also our ancestors as well. In fact, some villages we have which are predominantly dark-skinned, they are also our people. We don't look through a racial lens. Too many people nowadays do an ancestry test, DNA test. I'm this percent Cypriot, I'm this percent Anatolian. Oh my God, I have 2% Italian. Wow, I'm European now. No, they're all Cypriot. They're all part of our people. There was voluntary internal migration. When I say internal, from the Ottoman state, just imagine one country. So someone from the Balkans, Egypt, Algeria, Urfa, was all one country. Lefkoşa, Nicosia, was all one country. So you had internal migration, people going, leaving Cyprus, people coming to Cyprus. And towards the end of the Ottoman era, we have the sad case of Mauryan refugees, current day Greece. The Muslims fled from there. The Caucasus, the Circassians had fled the oppression by the Russians, and also from Crete, which is a very similar case to Cyprus, although the majority of them were Greek-speaking, unlike in Cyprus where the majority were Turkish-speaking. The settlement wasn't a one-off, it was continual as I mentioned, but the first families, it should be noted, were as the following: Beyşehir, Aksaray and so on, and I've created this map there for your benefit, dear audience, regarding the pinpointed locations, and as you can see, central southern Anatolian lands were sent to Cyprus. Initially, just in 1572 alone, we have 1,689 Anatolian families. I failed to mention earlier regarding those who had been settled and the class of the people that were sent. give you a few examples. 18th of May 1755, the Grand Vizier Hekimoğlu Ali Pasha was exiled to Cyprus. Namık Kemal, one of the young Ottomans, was exiled to Mausa, Famagusta. Muhammad el-Kandahari, Kandahar being in modern-day Afghanistan, he was from the Resmiye branch of the Qadiri order, and is currently buried also in Mausa, Famagusta. Akpazarlı Sheikh Es-Seyyid Osman Efendi of the Celvetiye order was exiled again to Famagusta, because Famagusta, Qal'a-i Mausa, or Qal'a-i Lefkoşa, the castles of Nicosia and castles of Famagusta, made these people what they call Kalebend, or Cezilebend island, prisoners of an island, or prisoners of a castle. Arab Alizade Abdurrahim Efendi in 1755. These are the ancestors of the Turkish people in Cyprus, the natives. So we must think of it in that, through that lens. I mentioned the Yörük and the Türkmen. So the Yörüks are from the western branch of Turks, from the Oğuz branch. They are semi-nomadic people. We still have Yörüks to this day, wandering in Anatolia and also the Balkans as well. There is a sample of the tribes of the Jemaat, the clans that settled in Cyprus. And we have an original document there, in case anyone's thinking, well, can we be sure about this? The Ottomans were meticulous in their record keeping. And here we have an example of such from 1714. This third branch here that we have, the Karahaculu, Kürtcülür, Tekellü, Melmenci, and so on, they were sent in 1714. These guys, they were troublemakers. They were from amongst that class. Because they were causing such mischief, the Shaykhul Islam Abdullah Effendi said, anybody of these tribe or the clans of these Turkmens or the Yörüks who resist exile should be put to the sword. So they had a lot of motivation to go to Cyprus. There were also non-Turkish Muslims. Now, a disclaimer. Anatolian Turks also are mixed. There were big dervishes going around and giving what they call dawah in Arabic, inviting people to Islam. So the Anatolian Turks also are a mixture of these Turkmens and Armenians and Greeks, and so Rums, Bosniaks, Albanians. There's nothing wrong with that. The Kazakhs are mixed. There is no pure race. There's no pure Greek or English, right? This is all part of history, all part of that heritage. But the core of which, the dominant culture, was that of the Turks, of course, because it's still spoken to this day and the culture continues. But there were non-Turkish Muslims, Albanians, Arabs from the Levantine, Shami Arabs, Egyptians, Sudanese, Algerians, and so on. There were Bosniaks, Muslims from the center of Europe, from Bosnia. Circassians, Roma, Gypsy, which in the records is Cingane or Çingene. I realize this may be an offensive term in today's day and age, but remember, we're not using current day standards. In that day and age, that's how they were recorded. And there were also many converts, Arab Maronites of Cyprus, Armenians, Latins, Romios, who currently call themselves Greek Cypriots. But this, again, should be taken as part of our heritage, but the bulk, of course, was Turkish. As you can see here from the records from the Kıbrıs Ceziresi'nin Nüfus-i Müslümin Defteri, from the records of the Muslim census of 1831, we have Medine-i Münevvereli, Muhammed Emin bin Ismail from Medina, Muhammad Emin, son of Ismail. We have somebody who's recorded as living in Piskobu, which is in southern Cyprus, Bosna Saraylı Boşnak Hacı Mustafa bin Ömer Hacı Ömer from Sarajevo in Bosnia. All the way from Sarajevo, he settled in Cyprus. And at the bottom there's an interesting story of Christofi Andon. He was dressing as a Muslim, and so there was a formal complaint. How dare he dress as a Muslim? In those day and age, the millets were divided according to dress as well. A Christian Orthodox would dress as an Orthodox. A Catholic would dress as an Orthodox. A Jew as a Jew, and a Muslim as a Muslim. So this idea of living all together and sharing this. Yes, we share the same geography, but we were very divided, even in the clothing that we were wearing. And so this Christian was walking around as a Muslim, and so an official complaint was made. It turned out he had converted to Islam. This was in 1594, very early on in the Turkish Cypriot history. From Ottoman era landmarks, we have schools which were known as Idadi, Rushdiye, Medrese. These are different divisions. So you have preschool, you have primary school, as you would call it in the UK, and Medrese, which would be an Ottoman version of universities, and you'd have Müderris, who were professors. We have many mosques, Hala Sultan, Arab Ahmet, Bayraktar, Cami Cedid in Leymosun. We have caravansarais, the Büyük Han being the most famous of which. Aqueduct, Ebu Bekir Aqueduct in Larnaca. We have an aqueduct in Lefke. Bridges, we have Said Pasha Bridge. We have fountains. Many fountains were spotted across Cyprus, built in the Ottoman times. Turkish baths, hammams. Cemeteries, the largest cemetery, I think from my knowledge, the second largest in the Ottoman state was in Lefkoşa. Currently, it is in the place with the Turkish embassy and the Turkish schools, and there's a petrol station across from Girne Kapısı, the Kirinya Gate. All of that was an Ottoman cemetery. Tombs, I mentioned Hala Sultan, Haram, who is in Larnaca. Piridede in Leymosun, Limassol. Hazreti Osman Tekke in Çatalköy, Northern Cyprus. Kırklar, Bayraktar. All of these house either saints or Ottoman soldiers who were martyred or lay in peace in Cyprus. We have castles, Larnaca, Limassol, Paphos. Now, there will be those who would say the foundations of those buildings were built by Greeks or Latins. If a building has been demolished and the Ottomans decided to build on those foundations, who built that building? Is it not an Ottoman building? I'm sure if we were to dig further down, we'd find prehistoric findings as well, right? So we need to take, or the Turks of Cyprus need to take ownership of these properties. Libraries, Sultan Mahmud of the time, he is the one who introduced the Tanzimat, the reforms in the Ottoman state. He realized that there was a nationalist movement inspired by the creation of Greece in 1821. So he wanted to support and develop the intellectual class of the Turks in Cyprus, and thus he actually supported the foundation of a library, Sultan Mahmud Library in Lefkoşa, Nicosia, opposite the Hagia Sophia Mosque, which is currently called Selimiye. 4,000 books were held in that library, in Turkish, in Persian, in Arabic, the intellectual languages of the Islamic civilization. Sultan Mahmud himself in 1829 donated his books from his own collection. Women's rights in Ottoman Cyprus. It's far too common for us to look to our history through the lens of Christian Europeans. In slavery, we look through the lens of European slavery. In human rights, we need to talk about women's rights in Ottoman Cyprus. They had the right to property, owning property. Divorce, what they call khul. They could go to a judge and complain. My husband doesn't treat me right, he's beating me, he's treating me in such and such way. And she had the right to divorce. Whereas in the Christian world, till death do us apart. Inheritance. She had full financial independence, such that we can see from the Kibris Şeriye Sicili, which means the Cyprus Sharia records of 1594, we have Sakine of Nicosia in court regarding 13,711 akçe from Hatice. Women were borrowing great sums of money between each other and were having arguments about this and had to go to court. We have again in the Sharia Sicil's records in 1595, Mihriban purchases houses, gardens full of olive trees, land from her husband, Bayezid, for 25,000 Osmani akçe. I wonder who had the pants in that marriage. We have the Christians benefiting from the system introduced by the Ottomans. Lino Constantine, a Christian woman, divorces her husband in Cyprus Sharia court. So the Christians had full autonomy in Cyprus. They had their own court, they had their own laws, but they had the choice, the opportunity to benefit from the from the Ottoman courts, and many chose to do so, as did Lino Constantine here. Now let's compare that with the UK, where we currently are. In the UK, you have the Married Women's Act of 1882. A married woman had the right to property in 1882. So when the British came in 1878, Ottoman women, Muslim, Christian, Romeos, Turkos, had more rights than the women in England. Early British era, which can be divided up into 1878, the British Protectorate. Why did they come? We're going to answer this question as well. 1914, illegal annexation. 1925, a British colony. At the time, there was Abdul Hamid II who was in power. And the Ottomans, why would they give Cyprus away? Sometimes I even hear this thing, that Cyprus was rented and all of this. Let's first of all hear the backdrop. We have Edward Stanley, Earl of Derby. He was in the Parliament. He actually quit the Parliament in protest because England was planning, Britain was planning, if the Ottomans were not to give Cyprus to the British, they would take it by force. And so he said, a friendly power like the Ottomans, they were allies with the Ottomans at the time, how can we do this, stab them in the back in such a way? This is all recorded in the Hansard. We have Sir Henry Layard, British ambassador to Constantinople, Istanbul, who is recorded to have said, it's in Ottoman Turkish, by the way, the reason being that Mahmud Celaleddin Pasha actually recorded this in his book. Eğer devleti aliye kendiliğinden Kıbrıs'ı vermez ise biz cebren alırız. If the Ottomans, the Grand State Devleti Aliye, does not willfully give Cyprus to us, cebren alırız. We will take it by force. The Ottomans at this time were in a very weak state. They had great debts. They had the Balkan Wars, the Russian, the Orthodox were all trying to take land from them. On the other side, we have what they call Elviye-i Selase, the three provinces of Ardahan, Batum and Kars in the east of Anatolia, which was taken. The nationalistic uprisings of the Orthodox people was a major threat. No Istanbul, no Ottomans, no Turks in Cyprus. So therefore, rather than letting them take it for free, for which they would have no power to protect, Abdul Hamid came up with a convention. He wasn't quite happy with everything mentioned, so he put an imperial edict, a Hakkı Hümayun. And Abdul Hamid mentions, Hukuki şahaname asla halel gelmemek şartıyla muahedinameyi tasdik ederim. Meaning that I am accepting these conditions with the agreement that the Hukuki şahaname, the imperial law, will continue forever. So this stipulation alone means that the British were administrating Cyprus, had soldiers there. Who owns that island? And those that say Cyprus was given away, Cyprus was rented. No, Cyprus was not rented. I refuse to accept this. In fact, my friend, the historian Mustafa Hashim Altan, he even said if anybody can find evidence to prove that Cyprus was rented, he will change his name. It's not possible. Why? Because in the convention it says Tedafi bir ittifak, which means that this was a defense pact. It's a military alliance, not a rental. Cyprus wasn't rented. So it remained as such, as I mentioned, up until World War I, where the British used that as a pretext to snatch Cyprus, but the Ottomans still laid claim to it up until 1923, with the establishment of the Turkish Republic. A very sad time because Turkey was in a very weak position. And in Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, Article 20, it mentions that Turkey is recognizing that the British are in control of Cyprus. And it was İsmet İnönü, who would later become the second president of Turkey, who was to sign this. We don't make any judgment because the times were very different then. The British coming had a great impact. on our cultural, religious, ethnic heritage. The Kirinya Gate had a great calligraphy by Feyzullah Dede with inscriptions from the Quran. The British came and switched it around. The Saray Önü Square, where they have the column, the Venetian column, when the Ottomans came, they removed that column. That column is a symbol of oppression. The Latins oppressed the Orthodox people. So they threw that away, where the Saray Önü Cami is, the mosque. When the British came, they re-erected it to its present position. A symbolic way, perhaps, to suggest their domination of the island. Now, when it comes to our identity, we've gone through a very rushed history of Cyprus related to the Turks of Cyprus. We don't want to superimpose our views, whether we see ourselves as Muslim Cypriots, Ottoman Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Cypriots, however you want to mention yourself. How did they view themselves throughout that time? That's what's important. Otherwise, if you're trying to impose something for political reasons or cultural reasons or your own, whatever reason it may be, this is called a major fallacy of presentism. You're viewing things through the lens of the current day. We want to view things through the lens of the records of those people. How did they view their identity through the ages? Let's go through step by step. Let's go through Muslim first. We have a Muslim ve gayrimüslim ahalinin arzu hali. So a request by the Kıbrıs Ceziresinde, from the island of Cyprus, olan ehli İslam ve ehli zimmet. Ehli Islam, the people of Islam, and the people of Zimma, those who pay the jizya, non-Muslims. So, in this record in 1789, it's referring from a religious perspective, Muslims and non-Muslims. Mufti Ziya Efendi in 1911, this is early British era now, he mentions in one of his documents, Cezire-i Ahali İslamiye, the Islamic people, or the Muslims of the island of Cyprus. So again, he's emphasizing the Muslim side. We also have Birlik Gazetesi, the Birlik, or the Union newspaper, which is a newspaper published in Cyprus in 1924, refers to them as Kıbrıs Müslümanları, the Cypriot Muslims. We have the National Geographic Society in 1928, and mentions these lovely ladies here as the Muslim women of Cyprus in Kukla, Paphos. That green flag there is used by the Ottomans to represent the Muslim people, by the way. So we have the Muslim argument. How about Ottoman? So we have here this gentleman with the fez, Kaytazzadeh Mehmet Nazım Bey, who died in 1924. He wrote a poem, Rahmeyleriz, Vicdanlıyız, Osmanlıyız. He says there, Osmanlıyız, Osmanlıyız, alemde biz pek şanlıyız. He mentioned this in his poem. He is proud to be an Ottoman. He is the grandfather, in fact, of Sheikh Nazım Kıbrisi. We have this other gentleman, Dr. Hafız Cemal, who is from Paphos. Originally, he moved eventually to Istanbul. He would also support the war effort, the Turkish independence war effort. And he wrote a book in 1909, published in Nicosia, Kıbrıs Osmanlılarına mahsus son hediye-i acizane, my special gift to the Muslims of Cyprus. If you notice that these two examples are from a later Ottoman period, when Ottomanism was rife. So they viewed themselves as Ottoman Cypriot. How about the argument for Turk? We have a number of records here. I've heard some strange ideas, some of which saying that the British came and took the term Turk and enforced it on the Cypriot Muslims, and took the term Greek and enforced it on the Orthodox people. If that was the case, then why is it that we have examples from 1595? Turkmen, Osman, 1595. The British were not there at the time. The British, weren't even aware they're English at the time. Turkmen, Osman. 1688, a decree of exile. Bey Pazarlı Türk Muhammed, causing mischief in Anatolia, is sent to exile, and he settles in Cyprus. Turk Muhammed, his name is not Turk. The naming function of those times had lakab and isim. Isim is name, his name is Muhammad. his lakab is Türk. Türkmen Osman, his name is Osman, his lakab is Türkmen. So these are Turkish sources, early ones. Let's go to Greek source. Gibrianos, one of the major sources in Cypriot history. Historiadis Gibru, 1788. He gives it in his census and he mentions that the Orthodox people are Christianon, Christians. Does he say Muslims for the Turks? He says Türkon, the Turks. So the Orthodox people also recognize the idea of Turkishness, albeit it may be in a different concept than what we view it from now, but nonetheless, Turk was recognized. The Ottoman census of 1831, Muhammed bin Türk Ali, Muhammad the son of Türk Ali, who was from the Kariye, the village of Siliku, from the Kazai Gilan, from the Gilan district. The same census mentions Türk Hasan bin Ahmed, Türk Hasan, son of Ahmed, from Lefkoşa, and we even know which neighborhood. Mahalle Ibrahim Pasha, the neighborhood of Ibrahim Pasha, had this individual. We have Şemseddin Sami, Kamusul Alam, 1896. This is a fantastic dictionary, encyclopedia. Anyone who can read Ottoman Turkish, I highly recommend you to find this out. It says Hristiyanları, referring to Cyprus, Hristiyanları ekseriyet üzere Rum ve Müslümanları Türktür. Saying that the Christians overall are Greek or Romans. Ve Müslümanları Türktür. And the Muslims are Turks. He doesn't say the majority or 80%. He says he says the Muslims are Turkish. That's 1896. And here we have a government of Cyprus, British era, identity card, 1956. This is my great-grandmother, by the way, from Polomitya, Limassol. The British recognized her race as Turk Muslim. Rather fittingly. A Turk Muslim. There was also a saying in Ottoman times and early British times that the Greeks would call old Turkish men. They would say, Yero Turko, old Turk. If you haven't heard this and you're Cypriot, ask your elders, they will know. Yero Turko, old Turk. Why not old Cypriot? Why not old Muslimanos? Ottomanos? No, Turkos. Cypriot. Let's go with this. This seems to be a fashionable one. Let's investigate this now. We have on this left-hand side this fine-looking gentleman. It says on the bottom there, Sadr-ı Esbak Kıbrıslı Muhammed Pasha. Sadr-ı Esbak means the previous or the former vizier, Muhammed, which is, the short version is Mehmet Emin Pasha. We have in the Başbakanlık Archive, the Presidential Ottoman Archives of Turkey, recorded in 1842, Kıbrısı Es-Seyyid Hasan Tahsin Efendi. So Es-Seyyid means that he's a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We have a descendant, a Cypriot descendant of the Prophet, Hasan Tahsin Efendi, who's referred to as Kıbrısı, Cypriot. In Tezkire-i Hatimetül Eş'ar, encyclopedic work of poets, we find a Cypriot in there as well. Kıbrısı Müfti Hasan Hilmi Efendi. The Mufti Hasan Hilmi Efendi of Cyprus, or the Cypriot. And here we have another one of my relations, my great-grandfather, who actually briefly went to Turkey. Any resemblance? Okay. And this is a very early Türkiye Republic passport, TC Hüviyet Cüzdanı from 1925, 2 years after the formation of Turkey. And it says on the bottom there, I took a snippet from his passport, it says, İsim ve şöhreti, his name and his title, Kıbrıslı Hacı Ali. Hacı Ali, he's been to Hajj, so he gets the title Hacı. Kıbrıslı from Cyprus. Now what we need to understand in this is that Kıbrıslı Muhammed Pasha wasn't living in Cyprus, he was in Istanbul. So it's very normal for something to indicate him as something that's different from the norm. Kıbrıslı is Cypriot, of course. And same with Hasan Tahsin Efendi, this is a encyclopedic work for a general Turkish reading audience. So it's very natural to be recorded as Kıbrısı. Kıbrısı Müftü Hasan Hilmi Efendi, or Kıbrıslı Hacı Ali. But these people were not known as Kıbrıslı or Kıbrısı in Cyprus itself. They would have other terms, Hacı, Müftü, and so on there, Rençber, farmer, and so on. So what we need to understand is, and what I find beautiful is, although in this age we're forced to pick one and it's at odds with each other, but are we doing the same with our own identities? If you are a daughter and you're married, do you say you have to pick whether you're a wife or a daughter? No. All of these are part of who you are, what makes you. And similarly, the Cypriot Muslims, the Turks, they accepted the term title of Muslim. They accepted that they were Ottoman, they accepted that they were Turk, and they accepted that they were Cypriot. All was used within the correct context, not for political reasons, not for fashionable reasons, not for likes on Instagram. This is what's recorded. Peace on Cyprus, the good old days. Unfortunately, those good old days didn't end in the 60s or the 30s. But the source of this Cyprus problem goes back to the Hellenic insurrection of 1821 in Moria, the Peloponnese, modern day Greece. It started with an organization called Filigetria, where they started to contact Greek-speaking Roman Orthodox people, Romios, from various places, the Balkans, from Cyprus and Anatolia and such, and they wanted what was called the megalidea, the big idea, or the great idea of establishing some sort of a Neo-Byzantine empire that would be for Greek-speaking people. They contacted Archbishop Gibriano of Cyprus, and Gibriano did actually send resources, and even they trained men. As you can see on the right there, the flag of Paralimni, where Greeks, Romios, Roms were recruited and went off to the Moria. We know that there was around 1,000 Cypriot Roms who fought in the Hellenic insurrection, and we have their names recorded of 580. What kind of a mindset would one have coming from and genociding the Muslims of the Moria? We have a book here written at the time that Greece might still be free. It says, within a few weeks of the outbreak of the revolution, the Turkish and Muslim Albanian population of the Peloponnese, previously about a ninth of the whole, had ceased to exist as a settled community. Massacres, genocide, a holocaust of the Muslims. These Cypriots who were going there were part and parcel of this. What kind of a mentality would they come back with? Would Britain accept anyone from Daesh to come back to the UK? No. They have a messed up killing mentality. But these people were coming back to Cyprus. And hence I say that was the end or the source of the Cyprus problem. We have on the top left there a flag. This is an original flag that was used by the Roms, Cypriot Roms, who fought for the independence of Greece. It says on there, Simea Elinigi Patris Kibru, flag of the Greek land of Cyprus. On the bottom we see, on the bottom left, recruits, and on the top and the bottom right we see capital punishment being exerted to Gibriano for high treason in 1821. He was even planning to have an uprising in Nicosia and Pascalia in Easter. So a stop had to be made. We even have politicians from that early period. Charalambos Malis, a Cypriot Rom who was a politician of that early period. And we have Küçük Mehmet Pasha, who was the governor of Cyprus at the time, who was to put a stop to this in Cyprus, who gave the capital punishment. And it's good he did, because more would have been killed had he have not put a stop to it. Unfortunately, because of all the killing, we have 54 Mauryan Turks who settled in Nicosia. How do we know this? The meticulous record keeping of our Ottoman forefathers, of course. This is the original on to your right, of the names of the people, of the males. The males would only be recorded in that time period. From various ages. Where did they settle? Mora'dan hicret edip El Haletü Hazihi Medine-i Lefkoşa'da Ömeriye mahallesinde iskan edenlerin esamileridir. Saying the people that were exiled, the names of the people who were exiled from Moria, who were to settle in the city of Nicosia in the neighborhood of Ömeriye. which is currently in the southern side of Nicosia. We have their names, Dervish bin Hassan, Garandashi Mahmud, Garandashi Hussein, and so on and so forth. These are the ancestors of the Turks of Cyprus. You have that Mauryan blood in you. So when you do your ancestry and your DNA, oh, I have a bit of Greek in me. Is that Greek or is it Mauryan? If that's the case, your ancestors were the victims of genocide. And they survived by settling in Ömeriye district or neighborhood of Nicosia. This is the unfortunate reality. There's beautiful things in our history and there's some very sad things. We need to embrace it all. We also have attacks in early British period. I won't go through all of them, but from 1894 in Paphos, Tahtakale, Mandralas, Limassol. In 1912 even, a Turk went into a Greek or Rum shop and he sees on it, it says 1912 Kıbrıs ihtilali Türkleri yiyecek. The 1912 Cypriot uprising will devour the Turks. Good old days, peaceful days. Yeah, he said, "Kardeşler, yeah." Yeah? And a funny bunch, which, to be honest, doesn't really even deserve any mention, but it's become such a fashionable trend now. Lino Bambagi. I am Lino Bambagi. Really? What's Lino Bambagi? Lino Bambagi is referring to what's in Greek, Lino Bambagi, in Greek, a peculiar branch of people who they say is crypto-Christian. Crypto-Christian means somebody who's secretly a Christian but pretends to be Muslim. Why? What would be the motivation? Okay, they didn't want to pay the jizya, the poll tax for non-Muslims. Seems reasonable, right? What about seferberlik? Seferberlik is military service. Only Muslims in an Islamic state, including the Ottoman state, would conduct seferberlik on their males. Christians were exempt from this. They are paying, the Christians would pay jizya to be protected. Their lives, their honor, their properties to be protected by the Muslims would go and fight and protect them. So this curious bunch who are labeled as crypto-Christians would also be crypto-Muslims. When it came time for jizya, they said, no, we are Muslim. And when it came time for seferberlik, they suddenly become Christian. Where were they from? What were their roots? They are the leftovers of people of Latin extraction. Majority of which would have become Orthodox or Muslim. But this was a handful of people, estimated in 1878 to be 1,200 people. All these people that claim Lino Bambagi, from 1,200 people? Really? Are converts to Lino Bambagi? I'm seeing that the self-declared Republic of Cyprus, in their official works of history, if we want to call it that, are saying that the Turkish Cypriots are from Lino Bambagi. Well, all of us came from 1,200 people. First acknowledge my history and my heritage, then we can talk on the table. As Cezire Derneği, my dernek tries to record research about our history, this is our history. If you're not willing to talk about my true history, and you're going to say Lino Bambagi, then we have nothing to talk about. First get the history right. So, converts, a convert is a convert, is mentioned as such in the Ottoman records. They weren't hiding anything. The records specify if he was a convert or his father was a Christian. It's all mentioned there. No need for Lino Bambagi. And the Turkish for it, many would call it Mezokorto. How come all these Cypriotists don't say Mezokorto? I thought you were a Cypriot. You should know these terms, right? Why do you have to feel the need to use a Greek term? Mezokorto comes from the Italian mezzo, corto, half, quarter. So if anybody was displaying signs of he's partially Muslim, he might be having a drink here and there, he's a corto, you know, he's in part Muslim, he's being part Christian. Okay? Where are they now? Some of them converted to Islam, but the majority of them converted to Orthodox Christianity. And I'll be displaying why. Remember, 1878 was the British era. There's no need to kind of hide who you are anymore. The Ottomans are not administrating the island anymore. We have Captain A.R. Saville, perhaps an ancestor of Jimmy. He said a somewhat different sect also exists on the island, members of which have been called Lino Bambagi. That is linen and cotton, a figurative expression meaning a mixture of Christian and Muslim. These people do not number more than about 1,200. They are distributed chiefly near Nicosia, Famagusta, Limassol, and in a village called Leo Pitru. Apostasy. We see in the British era great apostasy, which was known as tenessür. in Ottoman Turkish. Tenessür becomes you have become a Nasrani, a Christian. This was due to poverty. There was great poverty. The Ottomans couldn't invest during the end time because of all the wars. We have Captain Saville here in 1878 saying the Christian population is far more industrious and zealous in their acquisition of wealth than the Mohammedan, meaning the Muslim. And for many years past in the sales of land, the latter have generally been the sellers and rarely the purchasers. We have a newspaper in 1881, a Cypriot publication, Neon Kidu, 1881, which from many parts of the island, each week it is reported that 2 or 3 Muslim families are baptized. What does it mean to become baptized? It's not like it is now. A Turk could not be a Christian. A Greek or Rom could not be a Muslim, because Christianization means Hellenization. Islamization means Turkification. And so this tenessür was Christianization, and the descendants of such are now living in the south. And from what I hear from my Greek friends in the south, the most nationalist, EOKA supporting Greeks are those who have Turkish heritage through this tenessür process. And such a letter of urgency was written by Hacı Mehmet Ziyayi Efendi. And he was actually made by the Ottomans as a seyyar vaiz, a traveling advisor or Islamic personality. He says that ahali İslamiyesi umumen tenessür eden köyler, so the villages that were generally or mostly Christianized from amongst the people of Islam, Korfi, Lanya, Ayodino, Monarul, Doro, Monari, Trimiklini, Limnat, Vavla, Ayos, Anglisia, Vavatsinia. This is the original on the right, guys. Then he continues on to say, ahali İslamiyesi kısmen tenessür eden köyler. So kısmen, partially becoming Christian. Milya, Hrinya, Pishahi, Yukarı Civya, Ayatotoro, Girit Marot, Ayamerkur, Fasulla. Fasulla in Ottoman times was 100% Muslim. Further on in his document, this is a letter of urgency to the Ottoman state, mind you, in 1910. İsimlerini bilmediğim daha birçok köyler ma teessüf beliye tenessürler musabiddirler. There is so many other villages which have Christianized, which I'm not even aware of. Nimeti mariften mahrum bahusus merkezden bayit olanlar ise lisani Osmani'yi de tekellümden acizdirler. He's saying that there were many people, many Turks, who did not have the education to learn Lisani Osmani, the language of the Ottomans, that being Turkish language. So that's when we think about the living history of Cyprus, that means you're referring back to your grandparents or your parent generation. Oh, my grandparents were speaking Greek. Oh, they add the Greek words in there. Why? Because merkezden bayit olanlar, the people that were away from the centers, as in Nicosia, the city centers, they did not have the educational needs to learn Turkish. So the start of that mixture of the language from this period. In Ottoman times we will see how the situation was. He goes on to say, rahipler birçok Müslümanlar ifal ile tebdili mezhep etmelerine zafaryap olmuşlardır. He says that the priests were tricking the Muslims and they were very victorious or very successful in doing so. I'll be done shortly. The language, I mentioned, they said that the ma'arif, the education of the Turks, was missing in the British era. But in 1873 we see Ludwig Salvator, who spent much time and he wrote the great work Lefkosia. The language of the Turks in Cyprus is very pure. It is said to be the best Turkish of that of Constantinople. In contrast, the Greek spoken by Cypriots is a dialect with numerous Italian words. I'll skip the Italian words, as well as many Turkish words. The Turkish language is widely spoken in Nicosia. Men who cannot speak it are rarely found, while there are many who know only Turkish. Additionally, many Greek women are completely proficient in it. Very interesting. We go forward to 1896, Kamusu Alam again. It says, Hristiyanları ekseriyet üzere Rum, I mentioned this, ve Müslümanlara Türktür. Binaenaleyh Cezire'de 2 lisan söylenip ve Rumların da çoğu Türkçe ve Müslümanların bazısı Rumca biliyor. It says that the majority of the Rums can speak Turkish. whilst some of the Turks can speak Greek. How things have changed. Emigration. When the British came, they deported 314 Turkish convicts to Anatolia. Here we see an image of 266 Turkish convicts on board the HMS Black Prince in 1878. I see no such record of Greek or Rum convicts being deported to Greece. Why the double standard? What was the motivation here by the English? 1924, Cumhuriyet Gazetesi of Turkey mentions Adana'ya Kıbrıs'tan muhacir geliyor. It mentions that there are many muhajirs, migrants coming from Cyprus. There's also in Neos Philax, 1926, a Greek publication in Cyprus, by the Turkish Mota, is referring to the name of the ship. 25 Ottoman families departed yesterday for Asia Minor, most of them originating from Luricina. Those who claim that Luricina was Lino Bandagi, why would such people with such a sense of being Muslim and Turkish hate the idea of being ruled by the British to such an extent that they left to Anatolia? And we have again Cumhuriyet Gazetesi in 1926 saying, Kıbrıs Müslümanları Türkiye'ye hicret etmek isteyenleri miktarı 20.000 bali olmaktadır. Saying that in 1926 there was 20,000 people in Cyprus who wished to move to Anatolia, modern day Turkey. Quickly just go through the demographics for you. Kiprianos, who I mentioned earlier, the great historian of Cyprus, Historiadis Kibru, 1788, he mentions, now I don't know whether it's true or not, but the priests would keep records of the censuses for tax collection. He mentions that the Hristiyanon were in total 37,000, and the Turkon, the Turks, were 47,000, with a total population of Cyprus being 84,000. That would put the Turks, the Turkon, as he puts it, the Turks, in the majority. Whereas we have actual census records from Ottoman and the early British eras as well, we can see that from the Muslims being 33.4% of the island, in 1931 were 18.5% of the island. So any talk or any negotiation based on latest figures isn't fair. We move on to something more positive now. A culture of Ottoman loyalty. We have on the left here Kıbrıs Gazetesi, who has the armour of the Ottomans in celebration of the birthday of Abdülhamid II. And on this occasion there will be great rejoicing parties and such because of the Ottoman Sultan, despite the fact that they were under British administration. We have in 1906 Turks of Cyprus contribute towards the Hamidiye Hijaz Railway. We have Aşık Kenzi, a famous poet and mujahid, a fighter who fought in the Battle of Missolonghi and the Battle of Athens, a Nikosian himself, a Turk who fought for the Ottomans. We have Dr. Mehmet Ali Erginel of Lapta, who died in 1971. He was part of the Turkish independence struggle as well. We have Dr. Hafız Cemal, the person from Paphos, Baflı, who also supported in medical aid towards the Turkish Freedom Act. We have Ibrahim Ali, who sold his horse and donated the money to the refugees in Turkey. Many refugees from the Balkans, the Caucasus, and elsewhere were coming in and they needed help. On the 3rd of March 1914, the Muslims of Limassol donate £101, 13 shillings and 3 kurush to the Ottoman Navy League. This was the sympathies that they had. Their hearts was always with the Ottomans. We have a culture of Islamic piety, such that Mariti, when he visited Cyprus in 1769, we're talking about our heritage, our traditions, not what we or our ideas of religion may be. How were the people at that time? Well, in 1793, Mariti mentions the Turks must pray to God 5 times a day. Those who are occupied with work sometimes omit praying at certain prescribed times, limiting themselves to only 1 or 2 prayers. So the irreligious amongst the Turks of Cyprus would pray 1 or 2 a day, not the 5. The census of 1901 mentions that in the case of Mohammedan families, the names of the female relatives need not be given if any objection is given. No such stipulation is mentioned for the Greeks. Because in that time, the traditional culture of the Turks, you don't mention the female members' names. It was a matter of honor. Who are you to mention my wife's name, my sister's name, my daughter's name? It could even lead to bloodshed. This was all due to the honor that they had for their women. We have Bayram or Eid festivities in Nicosia in 1917. We can see the women in Çarşaf, and we can see it's led by the leading elite of the Turks of Cyprus. Muftus, heads of the Mevlevis and so on were leading that, and everybody was coming as if they're rock stars. 1928, Daire-i Marif-i Şehadetname, a certificate, was given to children in schools, and we see that the subjects amongst them was Quran ma'a tajweed, Quran along with the correct pronunciation. We see that there's diniye, ulum-i diniye, religious education. We see that there's geography, there's Greek, there's English, science and PE, even physical education. It was a well-mixed curriculum which included Islam at the time. We had religious orders. So the Turks of Cyprus traditionally have been Sunni Muslims, majority of which. Some Kızılbaş, but they were not in a majority. They were majority Sunni, belonging to the Hanefi school of thought in the canonical law, and they were Maturidi in theology. And then if you break this up even further, there was religious orders, tarikats, which means a road towards God. The largest traditionally in Cyprus was the Mevlevi order. The Naqshbandis were also very influential. They were more of the hardliners within the Sufi orders. Qadiri, Rifai, Bektashi, which used to be more Sunni before, and now it's gone more with the Kızılbaş, or what they call Alevi. It's going to become very close with them now in present day. And Bedevi, which is from Egypt originally, from a place called Tantar. This is a tradition of the Cypriot Turks. If this all seems, for those of you who are familiar with Cypriot Turks, or are belonging to these people, if this all seems very alien to you, then how well do you know your culture? How well do we know our history? That's the question that should be asked. Literary culture. When we think of Cypriot Turks, what do we think of first? Meze mangal? Çifte telli? Molaya? It's all very good and tasty. But we should also think a people that have a rich literary culture. We have here Tercüme-i Delail-i Şerif, written in 1717 by Ahmed Efendi Kıbrısi, the Cypriot. Delail-i Şerif is a poem, a very famous poem recited by Muslims all around the world. And tercüme here can mean translation, but in this context it means it's an exegesis, an explanation of that poem. 1717, we have Dasitani Kıbrıs by our very own Aşık Kenzi, who is a very famous poet. And I'll just read, if I may, just a small part of his poem. Thank you very much. Bunlar dört adadır alemde namdar, Mora, Girit, Kırım, Kıbrıs aşikar. İkisini zapt etti hilekar küffar. İkisi İslam'da bu dem bu saat. Girit de uğradı bu temaşaya. Baş oldu Muhammed Ali Paşa'ya. Medine vakfıdır Kıbrıs yasaya. Kudüs'le Kıbrıs'ı verir mi devlet? Which translates to, there are 4 islands globally known. Moria, Crete, Crimea, Cyprus are known. 2 have been seized by the deceitful infidel. 2 belong to Islam at this moment of time. Crete has also witnessed this, given to Muhammad Ali Pasha. Cyprus belongs to the Medina Charitable Trust. Can the state give away Jerusalem or Cyprus? Now we think of 2024. What's the situation in Cyprus and Jerusalem now? And how was it in the days of the Ottomans? Peace, multiculturalism, and today we see what we see now. We have Ümmü Haram, written by Hilmi Efendi. Felaket, which is a play written by Mansur Hasan Nefi in 1875, which was published in Istanbul. And we have the first to be published in Nicosia, Yadigari Muhabbet in 1893 by our very own Kaytazade Nazım Efendi, grandfather of Sheikh Nazım Kıbrısi. Turkish newspapers, I won't go through them all, I just find the calligraphy in these newspapers so beautiful. Look at the attention to detail, the artwork that had to go into that. Seyf Gazetesi, Davul, Islam, Mirati Zaman, and so on. We're getting there, guys. So the Romans, they're Roman Orthodox. They call themselves Romios. Greek Orthodox is a nationalistic modern term. They have little to nothing ethnically, racially to the people of Greece. If they want to see themselves as Greek now, we respect that. But traditionally, they were always calling themselves Rum, and we called them as such as well, Romios. This was their clothing, what they call here The gentleman in the middle is from the Ottoman period. He has the long baggy breeches, which is called vraga in Greek, and it's called dizlik in Turkish. They would wear black. That was the color of the Christians. Remember, the Christians wore different clothing to the Muslims. Then we have a Rum woman here, which in the Turkish dialect we call jira. Rum woman from 1835. Look how she's dressed. This is not a Turkish woman. This is not a Muslim woman. This is a Christian Orthodox lady. And even in the early British period, we see these fine gentlemen here in 1931 with their vraga and their dark clothing. And on the right there is a papaz, a priest. But how did the Turks dress? Did they dress the same? Was it very similar? We've got a Greek woman here. Keep that mental image, guys. Women's attire from the Ottoman period to the early British era. From Nicosia Friday Ladies Bazaar, which was a ladies' exclusive market. They had financial independence in what they call charshaf. Majority of them would wear white, but they were also striped and other colours. But predominantly they would wear charshaf, which is quite literally a bed sheet, if we translate it to English. El Mujaddesi, in Nicosia, in the south of Nicosia, now 1930s, charshaf. Nicosia 1838, 1882, Ayandronigo 1931, which is in the Karpas Peninsula. Famagusta 1922, Lana Kaperisterona in the 1950s, Limassol 1882, Paphos 1878, Kukla 1928. The standard here is charshaf. Whether we like it, we don't like it, is irrelevant. This is how the traditional dress was. The folk dance, guys. What's the clothing like? Let's compare it to this. Is there anyone amongst us who looks like in that clothing? Ladies, please, sorry to put you on the spot. Where are you from? Dohni Lurijan, that's in Cyprus.
Yes, it is.
From Cyprus?
Yeah.
You?
Karpaz.
Karpaz? Okay, I see similarity. There's a cultural continuation here. Thank you. How are the men dressed? So the vraga I mentioned on the Greeks, they're called dizlik. So it's a shalvar of Anatolia up to the knee length. And they would wear either blue or white to denote that they are Turks. They are not Romios. Darul Feyz Mektebi, Limassol, 1911. We have a gentleman here, 1828. So we can see how the dress was pre-change in the Ottoman Empire with the turbans, and it goes into the fezes here. All the way up to Peristorona in 1950s. Peristorona was known as a more conservative, more religious village in comparison. And let's end this on the Turkish luminaries on Cyprus. Remember, I want you all to go away with the idea that the Turkish people of Cyprus have traditionally been literate people, cultured people, educated and contributing to the world literary heritage. We have Siyahi Mustafa there, who's represented by the gentleman on the end there. His mother was from Habeshistan, from Abyssinia, hence why he was black. But we still accept him. We're not racist. He's a Turkish Cypriot. He was the head of the Mevlevi order, and he was also a distinguished poet of the Divan type. Very rich. Mufti Hilmi Efendi, he went to Istanbul to thank the Sultan for the library, and he wrote poetry for him, such that the Sultan Mahmud II said that you are Sultan al-Shu'ara, or Reis al-Shu'ara, you are the Sultan of the poets. Out of all the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan of the poets was a Nicosian, and this earned the jealousy of the people around him, so he left secretly and went to Cyprus. The Sultan, rather than punishing him for leaving, he rewarded him by making him the Mufti of Cyprus, Mufti Kibris, as is recorded. Muhammad Emin Pasha, Kiamin Pasha, they were Grand Viziers of the Ottoman Empire, Cypriots. Necmi Sakıp Bodamyalızade, an intellectual who was the head of the Shakespeare School. He knew English very well. In fact, he was one of the early translators of the Quran into English before the famous Pickthall translation. There was a translation by our very own Bodamyalızade. We have Ahmed Efendi Kıbrısi, who wrote that great book that we mentioned earlier. Aşık Kenzi, the person who was writing poetry, who was a soldier for the Ottomans, who would travel back and forth to Nicosia. His heart was very much attached to Cyprus. We have Dr. Hafiz Cemal, who I mentioned. Not only was he a doctor, he published books about medicine and such and health, but he also supported the Turkish war efforts. We have Kıbrıslı Muhammed Kaputan, who was a recorded Cypriot captain of the Donanmayı Humayun Imperial Galley, the captain of which was a Cypriot, a Turkish Cypriot, and his name of the galleon was Seyyari Bahri. Feyzullah Dede, who I mentioned earlier, he was the head of the Mevlevi order, he was a distinguished poet, and he was also a calligrapher. So, before we come and close, I want you all to think about. When we think of the Turks of Cyprus, we want to think about an intellectual people, calligraphers, poets, religious clergymen, statesmen. This is the standard that Cyprus has raised. Thank you very much. Teşekkür ederim.
Right guys, we'll now have a break, but I just want to say a big thank you to Mustafa. He's given us a lot of information and covered a lot of history. So if you have any questions for him for the Q&A, I suggest you write it down now so that afterwards you can remember them for after Ersu presentation. But once again, thank you Mustafa, that was fantastic. So we look to start again in about 10 minutes, so 5 to 8. If you need to get up, move your legs, go to the bathroom, please go ahead. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Your Excellency Mr. Koray Ertaş of Türkiye Cumhuriyeti and Your Excellency Çimen Keskin of Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Now my friend Mustafa has gone over the Turkish Cypriots heritage back in the early days when the Muslim religion had arrived to Cyprus. I will take over from the point where the idea of enosis came to the island. Mustafa has dealt with it a little bit. I'll just go over it very quickly, if you don't mind, so that it will stick in our minds, because the problem started with that idea of enosis. Now, what is this enosis idea? I will explain it. Enosis is the union of Cyprus with Greeks. What has happened is in 1796 a chap called Rigas Ferreros came up with an idea where they will join up all the Greek-speaking people in the world, make a big state and make the capital Istanbul. That's why they keep still calling it Constantinople, believe it or not, because they do not accept that to be Istanbul anymore. Taking on, this idea was actually started in 1796. In the first map that was produced, Cyprus was not included. And Cyprus Archbishop Kyprianos went to a meeting in Odessa in 1814 and applied for Cyprus to be included in this map. Ever since then, Church has actually taken over this idea and started spreading it in Cyprus. In 1821, Mustafa mentioned it, there was an uprising against the Turks, or they thought they would uprise and kill all the Turks, what they'd done in the peninsula as well, Peloponnese Peninsula. But unfortunately, a Greek chap called Dimitri from Ayani village wrote a letter to the governor of Cyprus, Küçük, and mentioned that they were actually planning an uprising. So Küçük raided the churches and found a lot of arms that were built up. The plan was, they captured some evidence as well, like letters and things like that. In one of the letters it stated how this uprising would continue with an explosion in Nicosia at 6 p.m. in a Pascalia, as Mustafa has mentioned. Accordingly, Küçük Mehmet dealt with them. 486 were executed, and the 5 priests as well. Now, coming back to the British rule, Mustafa explained how the Ottomans were forced to actually sign an agreement and give the administration of the island to the British in 1878. Now, 1878, as soon as the British took over, the Greeks' inspiration of enosis came to forefront once more again. What they were demanding was enosis. They wrote a letter and gave it to the first governor that was setting foot in Larnaca, a letter with the signature of 8 priests stating that they wanted enosis. So they kept on until 1931. there was a big uprising again, demanding enosis, where the governor's house was actually burnt down. Now, British clamped down on that as well. There was a lot of them that were killed, hanged, and accordingly dealt with. Now, after 1931, all the political activities on the island was actually more or less stopped by law. So, until the Second World War, no political activity was formed. But early 1945, the Greeks started again planning, and by 1951, they came across, they made a plebiscite amongst the Greek Cypriots, asking them if they wanted enosis. 96% of them accepted this, hence the Greek Cypriots started planning for more dangerous things for Turkish Cypriots. One of the most significant actions of the British on the island was that they had confiscated most of the Sultan's land, turned it over to some Greeks, churches, and when Turks actually gave the island to the administration of British in 1878, the land proportion was similar to this. Roughly, I'll be telling you this. 1/3 of the land belonged to the Ottoman trusts, and the rest mostly was Turkish Cypriot land. Greek Cypriots, being serfs before, as Mustafa has mentioned, they were not allowed to have any land, but gradually, under Ottoman rule, they started having land, but certainly the land ownership was mostly Turkish by the time the British had arrived on the island. What they've actually done, British has started clipping at the rights of the Turkish Cypriots, and when the Cyprus independence was given to them, the land proportions were switched over completely. I will give you a rough figure in the mosques properties and the Vakıf properties. Over 2 million dönums of Vakıf property was lost during the British times. The British gave the land mostly to the Greeks, as I said. The church's land from 35,000 dönums went up to 465,000 dönums ownership, and the ownership of the Muslim Vakıfs came down from over 2 million down to 33,000. So it goes to show how the British was treating Turkish Cypriots at the time. Now, coming to the 1955s, after the Second World War, the enosis idea was becoming more prominent. By 1950, the Greek Orthodox Church formed an organization called, can't seem to find the Revolutionary Council Revolutionary Council they formed, and they started bringing ammunition, guns, and getting ready for another uprising again. And who was this uprising going to be against? Yes, Turkish Cypriots. Again, they wanted to kill the Turkish Cypriots and get the island to join Greece. Kibris came to the island in 1954. Kibris was a Greek Cypriot that joined the Second World War and even the war against Turks in Anatolia. He came to the island to organize this EOKA organization that they called, they named it as EOKA. The EOKA, after organizing itself with the orders of the Greek ambassador and President Makarios, who was then Archbishop, on April the 1st, they exploded 4 bombs all across Cyprus and started a war, supposedly against British. And they kept saying that this was for independence. But we all knew, and everybody knew, that they wanted NOCs. At first, the British were the targets, but it soon became clear that Turkish Cypriots were an obstacle in their way, so they switched from British to Turkish as well. By 1956, the first Turkish Cypriot was killed by EOKA, the organization of EOKA. There were some other Turkish Cypriots being killed before then by the name of NOCs, but this was done by EOKA in 1955. The other one is 1912, Mustafa mentioned it a little bit, where in June they attacked Limassol congregation of Turks we call Panayır, and killed 8 Turkish Cypriots, injured 123 of them. Now, when we go on to the 1950s, with the attacks on Turkish Cypriots, the first Turkish Cypriot that was killed was a sergeant, Abdullah Ali Rıza. But then, by the 1950s, towards the end, 28 Turkish villages had to be evacuated because of the Greek Cypriot attacks on them, the EOKA attacks on them. Actually, one of the villages was my grandfather's that he evacuated from there. The killings were targeted to the Turkish Cypriots anywhere, civilians, it didn't matter to them. I'll tell you a quick story. I know we're pushed for time. So, my father was a policeman in the British administration, and he was chasing the EOKA people. One day they went to search a man's house. My father was a corporal and the sergeant was a Greek Cypriot sergeant. When they went into the house, my father noticed that the Greek commander, the sergeant, did not order the searching of the person that was suspected. So that was odd. That was against the usual standards of the police. So my father kept an eye on him and noticed him dropping something into what we call testi, a drinking jar. Immediately he grabbed hold of him and put his arms behind and called the other policeman to empty the jar. When the jar was emptied, there was 4 bullets in there. That meant that man was actually a part of EOKA trying to kill somebody with the bullets. So he was arrested. His name was Drakos. He's got a statue in southern Cyprus trying to throw in a bomb. So they put him in the Kyrenia prison, Kyrenia castle as a prisoner, but somehow he escaped again. So it goes to show that the police, Greek Cypriot policemen, were actually helping the EOKA at that time as well. Excuse me. The political leader campaign was Archbishop Makarios, and he was the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, and he actually swore that he would accomplish enosis. EOKA claimed to be fighting for freedom, but there was no such a case. The environment for the Turkish Cypriots were actually unbearable at that time. And some voluntary organizations started to form to actually keep a watch in the Turkish areas that the EOKA will not come and do any damage. There were voluntary organizations spread all over the island, some of them called Volkan 9 Eylül, and it was clear that with the EOKA attacks, they had to organize better. So by 1957, Rauf Denktaş, Burhan Albaltoğlu met and collected all of these voluntary organizations under one umbrella organization called TMT, Turkish Resistance Organization, to be honest. They were a bit successful. TMT was actually formed, I would like to tell you this information as well. In June, the Greek Cypriots attacked and killed nearly 30 members of Turkish Cypriots. One of them was over a 70-year-old woman sitting in a chair in front of her house, Another one was a 16-year-old boy playing football. So it goes to show how devastating they were. As the years went on, Turkish Cypriots didn't just resist the EOKA violence, they also began to call for the partition of the island to be divided between them and the Greek Cypriots. You can see that the Turkish Cypriots wanted to share the island, where the Greek Cypriots with Enosis wanted to actually overwhelm and dominate the Turkish Cypriot minority. And obviously this was not acceptable for Turkish Cypriots. Now, after the 1950s troubles that EOKA was creating for the British government thought of seeking a solution for this, and they tried to protect their own interests as well. So what they were proposing to do was to give independence to Cyprus and keeping 3% of the land for themselves. They called on all the parties to sign London and Zurich agreements in these meetings. They agreed to form the independence, Cyprus. Greek Cypriot leader was Archbishop Makarios, and Rauf Denktaş went to these meetings for Turkish Cypriots. The agreement was signed, and Makarios hailed it as a victory, and he was pleased, but he was actually not, because he had other plans. 16th of August, Cyprus was given its independence, and the new republic was not meant to favor one community over the other one. It was a bicommunal state, federated state. It was a delicate arrangement balanced between the interests of Greeks and Turkish Cypriots, preventing domination of one or the other one. Now, the agreement, in basic terms, I'll go over them very quickly. The Republic of Cyprus would be an independent state, and this independence and the sovereignty would be guaranteed by Turkey, Greece, and United Kingdom. The president would be a Greek Cypriot, and the vice president would be a Turkish Cypriot, with the Turkish Cypriots, both of them, having veto on any decision. So the Turkish Cypriots were quite happy with this. The parliament would be, the House of Representatives, consist of 35 Greek Cypriot MPs and 15 Turkish Cypriot. Certain decisions required separate majority. So the Turks were quite happy with this as well, but Greeks were not actually. In the civil service, Turks were given a quota of 30 to 70. So 30% Turkish Cypriot white-collar workers, 70% Greek Cypriot. In the army and the police force, it was 40% for the Turkish Cypriots and 60% for the Greek Cypriots. Education, religion, and personal law would remain separately, each community managing their own affairs with their own parliaments. Municipalities would be separate in 5 cities. For the Turkish Cypriots, the guarantees were enough, and it was essential for them to prevent the enosis. Importantly, the Turkey's guarantee, signed in 1960, granted, as I said before, 3 nations to guarantee the bicommunal standards and sovereign and constitutional order of the island. There was a balance that was actually reached there. That balance had to be continued, whatever. And we see that later on. That balance is still not accepted by Greek Cypriots. The leader of the Greek Cypriots, including Archbishop Makarios, hailed this, but then later declared these agreements are the present, not the future. And there was a hint there. 1962 in Panay, again he declared that he was for enosis. The cracks in the new republic started forming as the Greeks were not happy with this, and they called it a stepping stone to actually go for enosis. And they were planning another plan called Akritas plan to actually get what they wanted secretly. Now, there is a thing about this that we have to remember. The Akritas plan was secret in such a way that nobody accepted it until 1967, when it was published in a newspaper. Even when Turkish Cypriots were calling this, the Greek Cypriots were always denying it, that there was no such plan. Coming to 1963 now, at first the Greek Cypriots was not adhering to the standards that the agreement made by not allowing separate municipalities in the cities, and other 30% of the police force, white-collar workers, were not being filled. Police force was not being filled with 40% Turkish Cypriots. The army, 2,000, that was supposed to be, they were not fulfilling their obligations laid upon them. So the Turkish Cypriots blocked a tax law with the powers given to them. This was an excuse the Greeks were trying to get. So what they done in August, Makarios wrote a letter demanding 13 changes to the constitution. Among these changes, I will explain, is removing the Turkish Cypriot vice president's veto power, abolishing separate Turkish Cypriot municipalities, reducing Turkish Cypriot representation in the public service and the government. So basically, he was actually trying to push us to a corner where we could not do anything. The Turkish Cypriots rejected this, knowing what was lying behind it. And by December 21st, 2 Turkish persons, one lady and a gentleman, were killed, 21st of December. But we find later on from the information that the actual Akritas plan was to attack the Turkish Cypriots on the 24th, when the whole world's media was asleep with their Christmas break, and actually completely subjugate them. It said in the plan that they have to be either subjugated or killed. That was the plan, Akritas plan. The Turkish Cypriots' rejection of the municipalities not being separate was taken to constitutional court, which was the highest court on the land. And the court, before announcing its decision, Makarios was saying that he would not obey it. And apparently he did not. And the German Supreme Court judge, who was not very happy with what Makarios was doing, he had actually resigned. I had his name somewhere, but I can't forget his name now. I'm sorry about that. As I say, the gun-happy Greeks, jumping the gun on the 21st, started attacking entire Turkish areas, killing too many people that I will later on give you some figures. In a 10-day period, they've killed 133 innocent people. Now, I know 133 might not seem too big to you, but considering the population of Turkish Cypriots, which was about only 100,000, that was a big amount of people to be killed in just one day. Over 25,000 Turkish Cypriots were actually moved from their houses. That is more than a third of them. 103 villages were evacuated, or they were forced out by the EOKA gunmen, killing them as well on the road. And we find that altogether the amount at 1964 dates were nearly 1,000. I'll come up and make some UK comparisons later on, so people will be able to grasp at the severity that we was facing. One of the most devastating attacks that sticks to mind was the one in Kumsal, what we call, and it was done on Dr. Nihat İlhan's family house. The family house was just a standard one-story house. When the Greek Cypriots attacked on the 24th of December into that area, they went into the house, and would you believe it, they killed a lady, the mother, and the 3 kids huddled in a bath trying to protect themselves, hearing the gunshots and all that, and they were killed by EOKA gunmen or Greek Cypriots. There's some pictures of them which sticks into any Turkish Cypriot's mind forever. This is absolute devastation. I will tell you something else about it as well. Firsthand, the first police officer group that went there was under the command of my father. He was a sergeant by then, and he remembers going into it, and he still had nightmares about it after years and years, saying that this was absolutely unbelievable. He put a sergeant there called Kemal Balcı, not a sergeant, he put a policeman at the door, Kemal Balcı, to actually not interfere with any evidence, so nobody could go into that building to interfere with the evidence until the CID from Nicosia came, and they actually took that picture with the thing. So some of the Greek Cypriots are saying that there's a lot of misrepresentation of facts, saying that, oh no, this was not the picture and all that, but my father had seen it firsthand, and I believe my father, not the Greek Cypriots, unfortunately. The violence was not random, as I said. For the Enosis, the attacks kept going on. The mosques were desecrated, homes were burned, entire villages completely erased. By early 1964, Republic of Cyprus did not exist anymore. Turkish Cypriots were forced into the isolated enclaves. Only 3% of the land. Imagine owning more than 30% of the land and then being pushed into open-air prisons, 3% of the land, and they were blockaded in, we couldn't go out, and we had a lot of things not allowed to actually go, and the farmers were wrenched away from their land as well, so we had nothing coming in. Only Turkey, thank God, stepped in, and with the Red Cross was sending us food and necessary like clothes and things like that. Would you believe it? Makarios was actually trying to get customs duty on the second-hand items that were being delivered to us. And some of the things that I can remember that were not allowed into the Turkish quarters was milk for small kids. Among leather jackets, tires for cars, petrol, and things like that, was milk for babies. This was very curious. And when I looked it up, actually, it is one of the things that if a nation or if one community prevents another community's young children from developing properly, that is called genocide. And this is what Greek Cypriots were applying to us. I remember getting on my bike and riding about 5 miles to get milk for my cousin that was staying with us at the time. So that was so hard. The isolation was unbelievable. I lived through it, and I don't want anybody else to live through it. With over 25,000 Turkish Cypriots being made actually homeless, we can say, there was over 55,000 of us living below the threshold of food subsistence. So life had to exist in the enclaves. The education was affected. Most of the schools were closed, or we moved into safer areas organized within the enclaves. Healthcare, we didn't have no hospitals. It was taken over by the under-equipped clinics. Economic life was devastated with the Greek Cypriot administration not allowing any access into the enclaves. freedom of movement was obviously, and the 40 items that were not allowed to go into the Turkish Cypriot enclaves. I'll tell you a quick story. I don't know how I'm going with time.
Go on, of course.
I'll tell you a quick story with regards to the something that happened to me. After the roads or the blockades, they were still there, but they allowed us to travel from one enclave to another one, after searching us obviously. And my father told me to go over to Lefka to see how my grandparents were. I was being only about 10-year-old kid. Obviously, we couldn't send a woman because the Greek Cypriots didn't know what they would do. My father couldn't go, hence the job was down to me. We set off 6 o'clock in the morning to go to a place called Lefka, from Nicosia to Lefka. It's about 28-30 miles at the tops. It'll take you about half an hour, 45 minutes at the tops. It took us till 6 o'clock in the evening to get there. As we came out of the enclave, Greek Cypriot blockade was there, stopped the coach, got us all down, and I don't know if any of you know the old coaches that were used to travel people in 1960s. All the stuff, all the luggage, all the stuff was put on top of the coaches. Maybe we can find you a coach picture to show at that time. Then we were made to empty everything down, and there was 4 sacks of flour that we had to carry to Lefka for them to be able to make bread. Believe it or not, all the sacks would be emptied on the ground, and they would look for something in them. And we, as kids and ladies and everybody, would have to grab hold of them with our hands and put them back into the sack. On the road to Lefka, you will stop. If I say 4, you will say 5. I can't remember the number, but we were stopped a lot of times. And we arrived in Lefka at 6 o'clock in the evening. The 4 sacks of flour that we had on top of the coach diminished to 1 sack only, because it was all spread all over the ground, and we couldn't put soil in it. And even that sack contained a lot of stones in them. Now, among these conditions, Turkish Cypriots stood well, and they did not lose their resolve. We had 3 big attacks on Turkish Cypriots during the 1964s. One was in Erenköy. Erenköy is a small village in the northwest of Cyprus, and Turkish Cypriot students that were being educated in Turkey got hold of some boats, small boats, fishing boats, and they traveled to the Erenköy area, 564 of them, I believe. Now, Greek Cypriots, hearing that there were some Turkish Cypriots there, they wanted to annihilate them. The area was made out of 5 villages. They attacked them with 10,000 soldiers, some of them from Greece. On the 6th of August 1964, they withdrew to 1 village only, and the Greek Cypriots were actually shouting in the radio and putting newspaper ads that they should all come and see the Turkish Cypriots being driven into the sea. Thank God Turkey intervened again, and the jets came, and the jets bombed the attackers and saved us again, our students, our most elite students of universities, from being completely killed, and Turkish Cypriots mourning them. Some of them were actually killed along them, but a pilot also was shot down, a plane was shot down. The pilot was actually alive when he was captured, and when he was given back to us, his body, I could not believe the pictures that I've seen. I don't want to put it on there because it's so horrific, but he was cut in the center, and stitched with what we call chuval needle, terrible things. His arms were drilled with electric drills, and so I couldn't tell you how it was. And another one was in Geçitkale, where they attacked in 1967 November. 28 Turkish people was killed in that village. One of them was an 80-year-old man, over 80 years old. They tied him on a tree, I do not know for what reason, whatever reason. They poured petrol over him and they burned him. And they made all the civilian population to walk in front of that scene. Even small children had to walk in front of the scene. Now that was the last straw. Again, Turkey was about to intervene. They loaded them onto the ships. As they were coming, they were stopped, and they said, America actually told Turkish people, whatever you want. So Turkey gave them some conditions, and all of them were met. Over 10,000, around 15,000, I believe, Greek soldiers from Greece, which were not supposed to be on the island, they were withdrawn under UN supervision. And Grivas was sent back. Makarios was actually made to pay damages for the damage that they caused to the Turkish Cypriot houses and all that in the area. And they promised to lift the blockades on the Turkish Cypriots in 1967. They managed to do it only in 1969, but they promised it in 1967. Throughout this period, the Turkish Cypriots also faced political isolation. They would not, the Greek Cypriot leadership pretended to actually represent the whole of the island, and unfortunately most of the world powers were accepting this, and our voice was not heard. This narrative erased the existence of Turkish Cypriots, leaving them voiceless and without a word in the world stage. This all happened with UN Resolution 186. 186, 4th of March, we was told, or Turkey was told, that in order for UN soldiers to come and stop the bloodshed that was being carried out, or the genocide, was only for a recognized state to agree to the placement of UN soldiers on the island. And this is what happened. Turkey was unwantingly tricked into accepting that the Greek Cypriots that had usurped Turkish Cypriot rights were represented as the legitimate government of Cyprus. And to this day, we are still trying to correct that 186 judgment, giving the Greek Cypriots the rights that we had. Now, Greek Cypriots, even with that, were not satisfied. By 1974, violence started amongst them. For a week or so, there was some bombing going on. And on July the 15th, the Greek military junta in Greece orchestrated a coup. And with the coup, Makarios was toppled, and in his place, they installed Nikos Samson. If you can see the picture the first picture that you've seen on the left bottom was Nikos Samson holding a flag, going into Omorfida with a gun in his hand, calling on Turkish Cypriots to come and get that flag if they were men enough. So many people were killed in Omorfida. He was called the butcher of Omorfida, for your information, Nikos Samson. He was made president of Cyprus. Now, by this time, Turkey knew that things were coming to an end. And as the Turkish Cypriots were being fired upon, Turkey on 20th of July, but before that, 19th of July, Makarios' speech to UN is actually very telling. He was calling on nations of the world to come and save them because Greece had invaded them. Now, Turkey being a guarantor power, came to the island on the 20th of July, and they landed on the Kyrenia beaches, and soon after they joined up with Nicosia. On 22nd of July, a ceasefire was actually declared, and they sat down to talk in Vienna. Turkey and Turkish Cypriots offered them a very good deal, actually. They said, let's make a federated state with 5 cantonal areas for Turkish Cypriots to live in. And they would have one access to the sea. Greek Cypriots refused that. And they were planning to actually put mines and things around the area where the Turkish troops were. So Turkey knew that this, and we was hearing that there were some atrocities being committed as well. Turkey could not sit still anymore, and on 14th of August, Turkey launched its second operation. The second operation, one went to Güzelyurt, to the west, the other one went to Mausa, or from Mausa, so to the east. Within a few days, the island's 37% in the north was under Turkish control. That was then that we came across the atrocities that they had committed. One was Murata and Sandallar, where 120 Turkish Cypriots buried in a mass grave, and that included a 16-day-old kid, believe it or not. In Tashkent, 85 Turkish Cypriots were executed and dumped in ditches. And other places all over the island, there was news that Turkish Cypriots were being killed. By August 16th, Turkey successfully finished the operation. Now, after the 16th, they sat down again to negotiate, and it was agreed between Claridis and Denktash that we will have 2 separate regions, and the Greek Cypriots in the north would travel to the south, and the Turkish Cypriots in the south would travel to the north. The population exchange agreement was signed. Over 50,000 Turks came to north, and 160,000 Greek Cypriots with their own will, by the way. I must point that out, because in the agreement it gave them the right to stay in the north if they wanted to. They traveled to the south, yet Greek Cypriots stand up and start saying, oh no, they forced us out of our houses. No, they didn't. The population exchange agreement is there for all to see. The peace operation was not an invasion. It was a necessary intervention, a rescue mission to protect the Turkish Cypriots' lives and massacres that were being carried out. Turkish Cypriots finally had the security and the freedom that we wanted. I would like to give you some figures of the martyred Turkish Cypriots before I finish off, so that you will actually grasp the numbers. I've extrapolated them to the UK population, and here are the figures. Turkish Cypriot Mujahid army that was killed, that's the fighters, 201. Extrapolated to the British population, it comes to 125,625. Number of Turkish Cypriot civilians, I underline, civilians that were killed, came to a total of 1,523. When extrapolated, it comes to 951,875. So in total, 1,077,500 people killed in Britain. What would have Britain done? I'll give you some other figures to compare them with. In the Second World War, Britain's total loss were 453,000. 383,000 of them were soldiers, 70,000 of them were British. Imagine and correlate them, compare them with the Turkish Cypriots, where the civilians were the targets, not the combatants. Some more alarming figures. Men aged between 18 and 59, that is the fighting people that were killed, total 660. When extrapolated, it came to 424,375. The woman, I stress again, women aged 18 to 59, 72. When extrapolated, 45,000 women killed. Elderly, over 60 years, 130. When extrapolated, it comes to 81,251. That is the figures that Britain would have had to face if they were there. We faced it all. We stood up, we fought, and thank God, thank you Turkey for coming and saving us and giving us a peace at last that we deserved. And we must be thankful for this and try and protect it as best as we can. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Here's a quick overview of the timeline of the Turkish Cypriot struggle, if you want to take a photo. And here is what Cyprus looks like today. An accurate map with the TRNC in the top, the Greek Cypriot administrator south, the UN border, and the two British bases. So, before we get into our Q&A session, I would just like to round up with some final remarks. Thank you both to our esteemed panellists for their insightful and educational presentations. Through their work, we've explored the history of the Turkish Cypriot people across two pivotal chapters: the pre-, during and post-Ottoman periods, as well as the Turkish Cypriot struggle for existence and sovereignty in more recent history. As we reflect on this journey, it's important to recognise the significance of 1983, 9 years after the 1974 events, when the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was established. This state stands as the true and only representative entity of the Turkish Cypriot people on the island. Despite the lack of international recognition, the TRNC protects the sovereign rights of Turkish Cypriots, ensures our survival, and safeguards the future for us on this island with the unwavering support of Turkey. However, since its establishment, the Turkish Cypriot people have remained committed to their peace and dialogue. We have consistently participated in negotiations with the Greek Cypriot side to achieve a comprehensive settlement. Yet over the past 50 years, these efforts have been met with repeated rejection. The Greek Cypriots have turned down more than 15 internationally brokered settlement proposals, including the Annan Plan of 2004, where 76% of Greek Cypriots voted against reunification, despite 65% of Turkish Cypriots voting in favour for it. Similarly, the 2017 Crans-Montana talks ended with the Greek Cypriot side walking away. What remains after decades of failed negotiations is our state, the TRNC. It is our duty to protect and strengthen this state, which has preserved peace on the island for the last 50 years. Today, President Ersin Tatar, with the support of Turkey, has put forward a realistic and pragmatic solution, a two-state solution based on the existing realities on the ground. This solution reflects the truth that two distinct peoples with their own language, cultures and governance already coexist on the island. Yes, we face challenges. We cannot trade, travel or even send posts directly home to North Cyprus. Yet our resilience, as we have gone through tonight, has shown us that we can tackle adversity, and we have done so before. If we stand united in our identity, firm in our mission, and commit to working together, we can break down the barriers and secure our rightful place on the international stage. Let us honour our history, protect our sovereignty, and move forward with determination and hope. Together we can ensure that the Turkish Cypriot people not only survive but thrive as a proud and independent nation. I thank you all for coming, and I'll now open the floor to questions. I'll move on to this mic. Should we go over here? And if it's for a specific panellist, please state their name beforehand.
Hi there. Thank you for your hugely fascinating and harrowing presentations. Ağzınıza sağlık. I've got a slightly more future-facing question in light of the history that we've heard about today. Interestingly, one of the things that Ersu touched upon, and indeed Mustafa too, was the loss of influence and power subsequent to portioning off of land and selling off of that land under British rule. Many would argue that's not indifferent to what we're seeing today, unfortunately, with significant portions of land being sold off to foreign entities, to foreign individuals, especially from countries such as Russia, Ukraine, Iran, and perhaps most concerningly of all, Israel. So I wanted to ask Ersu in particular for your views on whether we're now seeing, unfortunately, history about to repeat itself, and what can be done to prevent that, especially in light of the atrocities that we as a whole nation have experienced and had to go through. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. What is happening at the moment in northern Cyprus, or TRNC? As you say, the Russians, people from Ukraine even, and Israel are buying a lot of land. Now, they have actually come and made a new law now that they cannot own more than one house. They're trying to go over this by making partnerships with Turkish Cypriots living on the island, but I think soon the government will actually have to take steps so as to prevent, as you say, big chunks of land being sold off to other people. That's my opinion, that we should do it because land is precious for us as well. We have to sustain ourselves on the island as such. My own opinion, as I say, they've got to pass laws prohibiting them from actually owning big chunks of land. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I just took the mic to thank our distinguished friends for this wonderful journey back to the history, and also congratulate the young Turkish Cypriots. Oftentimes when I sit down and talk about the current problems in the island and the future of Cyprus, I realize that how people have a shallow understanding of the realities on the island, and especially lack of knowledge about the Turkish Cypriots. So if you do not know our history, and if you do not teach our history for the third audiences, probably will not be able to reach to a meaningful understanding of our common future. The history informs today, and the history will inform tomorrow. And when we sit down and try to figure out potential solutions, we cannot think independently from the historical realities. So the two-state solution vision actually did not come out of nowhere. So we have tried on and on again for decades, as Eren underlined, on a federative solution despite this difficult history. But it didn't work out, so this is that simple. And it's not because of the Turkish Cypriots or motherland, Turkey's own position. Then, when the final attempts and real attempts by the UN has been rejected by the Greek Cypriots, and I do not actually target them here, it's a choice of the people. So we just say, okay, let's try to have a real peace on the island, and let's just formalize the current reality on the island, because currently there's peace on the island. It might not be a positive peace in the academic sense, but there's a negative peace. There's no violence, there's no bloodshed. And we are not seeing the dramatic pictures that we have been seeing all around the Middle East. So I guess it's time for a new thinking, new vision, and it doesn't mean that the two sides on the island will not cooperate or will continue to fight. No, it's a small island, and that there has to be cooperation on many issues, from electricity to water to migration, and this is abundant. And I guess, again, because of the history, there's ample opportunity for both sides to cooperate together as well. So once again, congratulations to all of you for focusing on the historical aspect of the matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I would like also to thank both the chairs of the YTC and the SOAS University Turkish Society and our esteemed panelists for organizing and participating in this panel. And as the representative of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus here in London, I would like to say that I'm proud of the amazing members of our society, of our community here, the Turkish Cypriot community, in fact the British Turkish Cypriot community, who are working tirelessly day and night to make the voice of the Turkish Cypriot people heard and our history understood. So this panel is indeed a prime example for these efforts, and so they are also fulfilling a very important duty, responsibility. And as of the history, I would like to thank Mr. Kureyşi for the detailed, excellent presentation of the history of the Turkish Cypriot people heritage, and Mr. Ersu Ekrem for the struggle for telling about the struggle for existence and freedom. And I believe it is one of the most impressive and influencing part of our history, which is a story of resistance, resilience, strength, devotion, solidarity, faith, and success, and hope. So it is with this resistance, with this struggle, with this faith that it took us to the establishment of our state, our free, independent and democratic state, of course, always with the unwavering support of motherland Turkey. So once again, thank you very much for fulfilling this responsibility. And one more thing, the last but not least, it is so impressive, and it gives us happiness, hope to see so many young people who have enthusiasm and interest in learning about the Turkish Cypriot people's history. It gives us hope for the future. Thank you.
I echo what our friends, their excellencies have said. This has been educational, this has been instructive. For 50, 60 years or more, the whole tableau, the whole of the Cyprus issue, the painting, if you like, has been painted by Greek Cypriots. The reality is that the United Nations, the EU, every other independent country in the world apart from Turkey recognises the Republic of Cyprus as being the rightful government, the rightful sovereign power. What can we do about, and this has been a wonderful occasion, and again, I welcome the fact that so many young people from the Turkish Cypriot British Turkish Cypriot community are here. But in a way, we are talking to and preaching to the converted. What is it that you think we should be doing in order to convey the just and correct picture of the Cyprus issue to the outside world? Because until we do that, I'm afraid what we're doing here will be to no avail.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that you've pointed very good point to us that our voice is not being heard at the moment. And the reason for that is the Greek Cypriots will always try and block us. Everywhere we go, they will say, oh no, they're the ones. Although the Cyprus government as such now, which has gone into EU, is actually not obeying over 100 articles of its own constitution. I do not know of any other European country that is doing that, and we should bring this to the forefront. But I myself believe that UN Resolution 186 was a mistake at the time, so we have to overturn 186, and all our efforts should be actually pointed towards that. And if in UN we get another resolution, then I think our voice will be heard more clearly among the Western powers as well as the world, as they say. I believe we should target ourselves to UN Resolution 186. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just keep it short. I'm speaking in the capacity of a historian and analysing what I'm seeing at the moment. And I would have to disagree in this current age that harmony that was amongst our community is no longer there. We are starting to shift towards a Mediterranean style of politics in Italy and even the southern side between Abuel supporters and left-wing football parties where they are rather polarised. I feel that the Turkish Cypriots are not there yet, but they are going in that direction. We need to harmonise who we are first, being proud of our Cypriotness, being proud of our Turkishness, and all the things that I discussed. It's all part of who we are. As long as there's a harmonisation and when we can move together with a consensus, as opposed to arguing over rather petty things which we should have learned when we was young. So that would be my analysis of this. If it's not put into check now, things are looking to get worse. So things like this, it's great to see the youth amongst showing so much interest actually. And let's hope we can harmonise all of these identities that we have. I certainly am proud of all of them. And we can move forward as one unit then. Thank you.
Right, guys, before we pack up, does anyone have any questions but are more specific to the presentations? Like, not really the Cyprus issue, because we can talk all night about that, but to Mustafa's presentation or either Ersu's presentation, does anyone have any specific questions? I'll take two and we'll go back to back. I see Cam there. No, go on.
Well, thank you both very much for your presentation. I could have honestly listened all night long, and I really mean it. However, my question is to Mustafa. I want to dispel this myth that there has been regular intermarriage between the two communities. We lived in peace and harmony. We intermarried with each other. And this is how some people put it across to us to say, we were fine. It's the politicians that did it. It's this, it's that did it. In your earlier presentation, earlier on in your presentation, you actually slightly touched on it. But if I understood it right, you're actually saying the opposite. That yes, they were proud of being Muslim, they were proud of being Turks, they were very touchy about their female folk. You said, I don't want you to even take my wife's or my daughter's name into your mouth, that kind of thing, how proud people were. Now, if that being the case, why is it that these people are putting out the story that we lived in perfect harmony, intermarriage, etc., etc.? This is a myth, is it not? That's my question. Thank you.
So, just want to clarify as to what, so that I've understood properly. So, Kenan Bey, are you saying that there wasn't any mixing, or it wasn't as it's portrayed, perhaps, or is it exaggerated? Is that?
There may have been some, but it's not as, it wasn't as portrayed as it's been put out to us. That's my feeling. What is yours?
There's many ways we can extrapolate this question. First of all, I'd say conceptions of identity were different in the past to how they are now. As I touched upon in the presentation, many of us are doing DNA tests, doing ancestry, I've got 3% this, and it's as if somehow that's confirming who we are. Right? Turk is an ethnicity, Greek is an ethnicity, English, Chinese, they're not races. Right? Hence why we can have somebody from Pskov or somewhere who was very dark-skinned, and we accept them as Turks. And on the other end of that spectrum, you could have somebody who's very fair and blue eyes, and they too are Turkish Cypriots. That's fine. Ethnicity is having that commonality in religion, in culture, in language, and a common origin. Even if it's a perceived origin, it doesn't matter. As long as they're accepted in that community, then that's fine. So historically speaking, there has been some fluidity in that. So as I said, a Christian, a Turk could not be a Christian, for example. That would mean that they've become Rum. Yeah, tenessur. And similarly, if a Greek was to become a Muslim, they would be accepted as a Turk as well. So there was mingling as well, just as there has been in Anatolia as well. But how many Armenians or Pontus or such, Rize, for example, many people from there have stock from non-Turkish origin if we go on from DNA-wise. But who would ever say that somebody from Rize isn't a Turk? Why is it that we perceive Turkey to have the patent for Turk? There are Turks, the Anatolian Turks, there's Balkan Turks, there's Cypriot Turks, Tebriz, Northern Iraq, so many different flavors of Turks, and they've all intermingled in some way, but ultimately the core of their identity and what they've been able to strive for and keep alive to this day is that Turkishness. And that's not in a nationalistic sense, it's actually in an ethnic sense as well. I would agree with you, there was intermixing, but there was also large numbers of other Turks coming in from Anatolia, even from northern Syria. Aleppo was known as Halepi Turkmen, for example. So there has been that regular Turkmen and Yörük people that have come to Cyprus. So in many respects, if we were to compare ourselves to other provinces within Anatolia, the argument could be said that we're more ethnically or racially Turkish than many provinces in Turkey itself. So why are we not questioning a Turkiyeli, as we would say in Cyprus, about their Turkishness, but we're always on the defensive of how we are? I have no issue with having somebody of Orthodox faith in the past becoming a Muslim and being accepted as a Turk. I will accept them, no problem. That's not a problem for me. But also, it shouldn't be exaggerated. We aren't Crete. Crete was where they had elite Turks. The elite were Turks ethnically, but the majority of the people were actually Greek Muslims. Cyprus is a different story. The majority were of actual Turkish stock. So I don't think it should be exaggerated. We accept and we are proud of all the mosaic that Cyprus has. But I would tend to agree with you in somewhat that mixture is probably exaggerated somewhat for political reasons. And that perfect era, there hasn't been, there's been rebellions in the Ottoman Anatolia, there's been rebellions in Cyprus as well. There's been brief instances of peace, but in mixed villages even, the Turkish coffee shops were separate from the Greek coffee shops. The schools were separate. They spoke their own languages. They had their own religious institutions, the mosques, so they might be sharing the same geography, but in reality, they were sharing very different spaces. They were separate from each other, even from then. Now, if we was to have a united Cyprus, now how well would we do in preserving identity? I'm all about identity. That's my main thing. It's a question that I pose to the respected audience. So.
Sorry guys, running around a bit. Right, well that question concludes tonight. I thank you all for coming here. I just want to touch briefly on a special guest we've got in the audience. His name is Arif Tahir Erisen, and now he's brought really important copies of his book on the Cyprus problem and the negotiation process over the last half century. I found it really interesting, I found it really insightful. So please come up and, to this man, Arif Bey, and he may be able to give you a book and speak to you a bit more about it. And secondly, on Saturday we're hosting a vigil outside the Greek Cypriot embassy to commemorate Bloody Christmas, which happened in 1963, as we went through. It would be great if a lot of you could come. We've got the diehards from Embargoed, Nejlabla, BTCA will be there, and YTC, myself. So if you really do have a moment on Saturday evening, please come along. Thank you all. We'll be doing food and drink in the JCR. I'm hoping Charlie will lead you all out. If you've got to go home, that's absolutely fine, but have some food and drink. We've got tea, kahve and water. Thank you very much.